All right, what's happening, poker people? This is John Anhalt, and I'm going to be doing a series of videos, kind of an extension of our Polished Poker series, which is a free ebook, and this is going to be a free video series. I'm going to be going into as many different no-limit Texas Hold'em concepts as I feel is appropriate. I'm kind of subtitling this video series Beyond the Basics, but we're also going to be going into a lot of foundational concepts. I'd say this video series is primarily going to target 50 NL and below players, but if you're kind of in that 100 NL bracket, maybe even 200, there's going to be some things that you're going to pick up from here, so you can give it a look and see what you think. But I'm going to primarily be focusing on players that maybe you are already winning some and even at a decent good clip, but I'm going to try and really bring your game into some other levels and make some of these concepts as clear as I can, some things that I use myself. If you don't know anything about me, I'm the founder of Ace Poker Solutions, and we do lots of different software like LeakBuster, Ace Poker Drills, etc. I've been playing online for about 10 years now, which you know what that means. Basically, I'm getting old. But it also means that I've played millions of hands. Post Black Friday, I do not play as much as I used to. I used to be primarily a mid and high stakes player. I don't keep a lot of money and don't feel comfortable keeping a lot of money online anymore, honestly. So I'm primarily playing 100 NL and 50 NL. So I'm playing and talking to some of the games that I kind of, just above playing myself. I do play some 200 NL, but that's about all I'm going to be playing for now. And to be honest, sometimes it's a little bit like watching paint dry when you've played much higher successfully, but at the same time, it's fun kind of teaching these concepts and seeing some light bulbs go off. So my goal is going to be to try and enlighten you into some areas, go into some concepts don't really, or at least I haven't seen other people talk about. But we're going to start with square one. So if we want to be successful at anything, let alone no limit hold'em, we need to have a great foundation. It needs to be solid, and we have to be building upon these concepts. Foundation's weak, everything else is going to be weak. You're going to be building a house that's eventually going to collapse on you. So believe it or not, having coached, lots of mid-stakes winners and things like that over the years, even though there's a lot of foundational errors in their games. So if you think you're an exception to this rule, well, you're probably fooling yourself. There's definitely certain things. Even I have certain cracks in my foundation that even if I'm doing them, maybe I'm kind of aware of them. But so there's like different levels. You may have them and be completely unaware. You may have them and have some awareness, but you're still doing them. So where you're at doesn't matter. You have some cracks here, and we want to kind of plug those up. And I'm not going to go into all of those foundational things in this video. This video, I'm going to focus on a specific topic in positional. It's going to be about using position, but a strong foundation means that you're making solid pre-flop decisions, and this is where a lot of people's undoing is. I think also people that they start to have some success, also primarily in a lot of 6-max games today, the ranges start getting very wide because people start thinking they can outplay a lot of their opponents in a lot of situations. And believe it or not, if you actually kind of cut down some of those hands and made some better pre-flop decisions, you'd increase your win rate even more rather than trying to outplay everybody every single hand. It can not only get quite taxing if you're multi-tabling, but it's very difficult to do with limited information. You're not going to be doing it as effectively as you might think you are. So I guess the moral of that story is sometimes you think you're better than you are, and you need to take a step back and realize that there's a way to make the game even easier. So I'm going to be going into some of that, but not in this specific video. Good bet sizing. Lots of bet sizing errors here. I've see, like, if I go into any kind of major poker forum, I could pick out hundreds and hundreds of hands from people posting 50 NL and below, and lots of really bad bet sizing decisions. So that's an area we're definitely going to go into too at some point. Aggressive value betting, missing spots where you need to be getting thinner value, or recognizing that you may be value betting into an opponent's better hand, but most of their range is still weaker that they're going to call with. That is a huge leak, and I see it quite frequently. And if people even just got slightly better in that area, I mean, it would totally transform their game. So good positional awareness, which I have bolded here. That's because that's kind of what we're going to be talking about in this video. We're going to go into some specific examples. I'm going to show you the EV of a very common play and kind of how board textures affect and change that play. So a good grasp of hand ranges. I put this as foundation, but it's something that does take a while to start to build and understand. But it's essential if you want to start kind of taking those next steps in your game. And there's definitely some exercises and things you can do, and if you email me or contact me, I can give you some exercises that you can do on your own. But again, I'm not going to focus on that here. Kind of want to touch on exploitative play. And I want to touch on that specifically because that should be your primary MO. That's the area where you're playing against other players. They're going to have holes in their games, and you want to make sure that you're exploiting those effectively. Kind of highlighting this because there is a lot of hubbub about game theory and things like that. I think a lot more lately, and it is, I think, a good concept to understand and to get an idea of. But at 50 NL, there should be very little implementing of it. And I mean, hopefully the reason would be clear. Because your opponents have all these holes and weaknesses, you want to make sure that you are focusing your bet sizing, how you're playing situations in order to extract as much value from them in the situation, balancing your range, and keeping them off balance in their game isn't going to be as important. And I'm not saying it's not important at all, and there may be some very good regs in your game that do have some concepts of this, and you can maybe check certain types of hands a little bit more top pair hands, sometimes some middle pair and different things of that nature. But in general, I'd say 98% of your game should be focused on exploitative play, and how to extract as much EV from your hands against your opponent's weaknesses. So don't worry about, should I be checking this hand 80% of the time and check raising at 5%, stuff like that. That's it. I guarantee you have more holes and more areas here that you're going to need to work on before this area starts really paying off for you. And definitely it will as you start moving into even some of the higher small stakes and mid stakes games today. But even in some of those, in most of those, this is going to be where you're going to want to be focusing and making sure that you have this part of your game down and that you're exploiting your opponent's bad play. As you start getting against really good regs where their game and understanding is similar, then this game theory and balancing and stuff like that becomes a lot more important. But there's should be very few opponents in your games where that is the case. So we're going to get down to it. In this video, we're going to be talking about using good positional awareness, specifically about flatting in position. And I'm going to start off by confusing you and saying, really, you should not be flatting in position very often. But of course, I'm going to do a whole video about flatting in position, so why am I contradicting myself? Well, not saying not to do it very often doesn't mean you're never going to be doing it. We want to be doing it against very weak opponents and against some of the weaker regulars that are in your games. I'm not going to go into a specific range of hands from each position and what you should be, but I'm going to focus specifically right now on the button. The button should be, that's your money winner, and you want to be super aggressive on the button. That means 3-betting, post flop, raises, all these kinds of things to stay aggressive. And I say you shouldn't be flatting very often in position because anywhere at any part of the game, pre-flop, post-flop, anytime that you're seizing initiative to your opponent, you're giving them the advantage. So, that doesn't mean that you don't ever call and trap and stay in with, an okay hand versus their really weak hand range and yada yada. But in general, you want to be taking initiative. That's going to be making you money, and that's, we talk about that in polished poker. So as I said, be very aggressive in position. Weak opponents, you know what those guys are. We're talking about the fish. We're obviously, of course, talking about anyone who's going to limp in front of you. We're talking about any of the guys that like to call raises and then fold on the flop, or look up artists like we talk about in polished poker, where they'll call a flop bet but fold on the turn a high percentage of the time. Those kinds of guys, or weak regulars that are one and done type opponents. They're mass multi-tablers. They're not hyper aggressive, or they're not going to try and get into a leveling war against you. You'll know if you have a regular and you feel like you're kind of getting in a leveling war. Well, that's probably not the person you want to be flatting with, marginal hands, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about: suited connectors, things of this nature. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about the differences between dry and wet flops. This is good information to know. Maybe you already know it, but all of these little differences will make a big difference as you're deciding what to do, how to play a hand, when to bluff, etc. So, if we have an opponent who's opening about 20% of his range, which we have marked here, it's pretty strong, 20% from, say, middle position. On a rainbow flop, like here in example 1, 8-4-3, our opponent is connecting 27.97% of the time. So by connecting, we mean, and you can kind of see it here on the sidebar, they're hitting a set 3.7% of the time. They'll have an overpair 14.8% of the time, top pair 2.4, pocket pair below top pair almost 7.5%. No open-ended straight draws. They'll have a gut shot. So that's including draws and everything that's really feasible for someone to try and continue on a board with. So that's not a whole lot. So you can see on dry low flops, this is about an average because it's going to depend on exact board texture, 26 to 28.5% of the time. On low wet flops, 29 to 35% of the time. So low we're defining as 8 or below, and we compare that here, the example 1 against example 2, where we have the exact same board. We just change the 4 of clubs to the 4 of hearts, and now our opponent connects almost 33% of the time. So what does that mean? That's a 5% difference. But what it does mean is gives us that much more fold equity in a lot of spots if we are picking up on these kinds of situations correctly and raising and staying aggressive against opponents. Because most of the time someone opens, they're going to c-bet boards like this almost 100% of the time. Some opponents will slow down, but most opponents, especially I would say at 50 NL and below, are just going to auto c-bet these things because it works for them. It doesn't quite work that way as you start moving up higher in stakes because people are going to float you more and more and be more aggressive. So, but you can take advantage of that now. You're playing 25 NL or 10 NL or something or another. You could take advantage of this difference and raise your opponents more or float them more and things of that nature. So let's continue a little bit of analysis here. So now let's take the same 20% opening range that our opponent will have, and let's change up the flop just by one card here. So let's put a queen on there. We'll change the 4 to a queen, so we have queen 8-3. Now on a wet board with 2 diamonds, our opponent's going to connect 42.66% of the time. And again, by connect, we mean, sets, top pair. I'm not going to have any 2 pairs here because of how we set their range. Flush draws, yada yada. So all those kinds of things, those are hands that our opponent's generally going to connect with. And here we just remove the suit and we just make it rainbow, and it changes to 38.25. But you can see these right here is a huge difference. This is almost a 15% difference between what we had going on over here and what we have here between a wet flop with the queen high versus a dry flop with 8 high. So it's significant because now floating doesn't become as profitable, raising doesn't become as profitable, so on and so on. Those are important distinctions and differences to note. So let's take a look a little bit more and see what else we can discover. Let's go ahead and apply some of this information to a real world example and see kind of how we can take advantage of some situations. So here we have a so-so regular opens in middle position, about 20% of his range, like we were just analyzing, a 6 max cash game. You can see here he opens 3 times the big blind and call on the button with 7 of diamonds, 6 of diamonds. Flop comes 4 queen 8 rainbow. Opponent c-bets about 2/3 the pot. I raise to $6 and they fold. So here our opponent hits this particular kind of flop 38.28% of the time. So as you can see, we're risking $6 to win $6. So only need our opponent to fold 50% of the time to break even. Not too hard to make that assumption, even if you just kind of intuitively think about how often you have your opponent's range and what they're going to be continuing with here. Of course, this is a dry flop, and you're not going to have hit this very hard too often either. But if you're picking your opponents right and you have your so-so regs, you're not going to get them rebluffing you almost ever, or a very small percentage of the time. So it's clearly profitable to go ahead and raise because they're going to fold more than 50% of the time. I mean, they only connect to 38.28% of the time. We'll push this a little bit further and kind of break down some more of the EV here because, of course, if you really want to calculate this out, we're looking at how often they're re-raising, we have to fold, and so on and so on. But we'll go ahead and get into that a little bit more here. I think the point I want to make in these kinds of examples is they will happen, a few times a session, maybe once a session or whatever. And I've coached players and they think, well, I missed a flop and that's it. And when you have that button, that's not how you should be thinking. You should always have in the forefront of your mind, how can I win this pot? So in a situation like this where you have a gut shot, backdoor flush draw, and you have position, you should be winning this hand a high percentage of the time. And I'm going to break down some more of the reasons why, but this is a spot, you don't want to be just zoning out and auto folding. You want to make sure you're taking advantage of it as often as you possibly can be. You're flatting in position to begin with because your opponent is not very good, and you have a high percentage of time that you will be able to outplay them. So let's go ahead and break this down a little bit more. Let's say our opponent does call the raise, and they call with eights plus, a pair of queens, sets, um, 8, queen 10, queen jack, all those things, or even adding some hands that weren't necessarily in their starting hand range to begin with ace 8. But anyways, just to kind of give an overall thing, because no one's going to just only raise X percent of hands, of course. I'm sure, as you know, that 20% will differ or change kind of depending on how they're reading the table and so on and so on. But anyway, so we give them a pretty reasonable calling range. Against that, we still have 22.2% equity. So that should give you a huge bing, hopefully, if you're not already making sure you're taking advantage of these situations. But that's still a heck of a lot of equity, and most of the time, let's say for example somebody does have king queen and they bet, and you raise here, most opponents are going to be calling. So what that's going to allow you to do is probably realize your equity 100% of the time. There will be X percent of the time that your opponent is going to repop you here and you're going to have to fold. Some percentage of that will be for value, and probably a very small percentage of it as a bluff. But most of the time, let's say even ace queen or something, for example, they'll call, for either deceptive reasons or because they want to control the pot size. And now the turn comes 3 of diamonds. Now you can decide, do I want to barrel again? You picked up, well, you only have 1 card to go, so your equity is going to be pretty close, but you still have picked up a little bit more equity. Then you can decide, do I want to, try and realize it all and check behind and hit a river card? And if you do in those spots, like you runner or flush or something, or you do hit your gutter, you're probably going to win a nice sized pot. So, you add all those things together, and it makes for a very profitable situation. So, anyways, so we take the equity we do have, and what we're risking in the hand, and we only need our opponent to fold on the flop, and on this play here about 25% of the time. That's all that has to happen. So if you now and again, that's not counting for the times that we get repopped and we have to fold. That does factor in there, but there's a lot more factors that go in there too. Like if our opponent calls, how often are we betting and they're folding the turn? There's a whole EV tree that has to happen, and I'm not going to break down all of that. I'm going to go into some of the important points, because I think you can clearly intuitively see your opponent is going to fold, only needs to fold 25%, not including some of those other variables. So let's say they only need to fold 40%. Well, they're going to fold at least that often if you're raising there. So we were kind of talking about, to get the exact EV calculation, we have to put X percent of the time we're rebluffed, we have to fold, and Y percent that they're just doing it for value. I would say approximately 5%. That might even be high depending on the stakes you're playing. They re-raise as a pure bluff, and 10% of the time that they do it for value. It's about 15. Maybe we could even say as high as 20% of the time, but I think that's really too high. You'll face a re-raise and lose $6. So let's just keep it really simple and say our opponent will fold 60% of the time on the flop. We will have an EV difference of about $1.20, because on those times that we have to fold 15% of the time, we'll lose 90 cents. And if we take the EV of the times that they fold and sometimes call, you're roughly going to be making about $1.20 per hand, or almost 2.5 big blinds per play. So those differences add up. They really do. Maybe you run into this kind of situation once every 400 or 500 hands. That's a difference over time. That's going to make a significant win rate impact. So, the other small thing is, like I said, if you're picking your opponents well, you're not really going to necessarily be getting into leveling wars. You will have some opponents that will fight back in these situations, and if you're picking on a particular regular, you might start to have that dynamic to occur. But then you want to take advantage of that. You want to set them up and make sure you're staying one step ahead of them. So, for example, you're raising there with some air and gut shots and different things like that, and you have another dry board, maybe you have a set, and they bet into you, and maybe against other opponents where you didn't have this dynamic occurring, you might flat with the set on a dry board, hoping, because a lot of opponents will double with a fairly wide range, or they'll pick up equity and double barrel. But in this situation, you would raise, and then your opponent spazzes out, and re-raises with air, or just goes too far with the hand they normally wouldn't. So those are the kinds of things you can set up. But in most situations, I don't think you should or want to get yourself into leveling wars. There will be situations that'll be appropriate if if you have a regular that's in your games a lot, but don't look to be flatting in position against them if they're competent and good. If they're so-so, or you feel like you have some advantage, then of course do it. Experiment as well, but overall, don't outthink yourself here. Try and keep it simple. Another important point that I just kind of want to highlight real quick is, if we take that exact same range and board, and we change your hand from 7-6 of diamonds to ace jack, ace of clubs, jack of diamonds, your equity drops from 22.2 to 13.03. So the moral of the story is you have much more equity here, and you have a higher percentage of the time that you're going to get paid off if you do hit with this kind of hand. Hopefully the reason should become obvious. Here, some of your outs, like an ace could be counterfeited, or may not get you paid off. Some of these players might get spooked when an ace hits. So you raise, they call with jacks, or something, and then you do, they check the turn, you check the turn, the river comes an ace, they check and you bet and they fold or something. It's much more difficult to get paid off in those situations, and sometimes your outs aren't going to be good here. When you do hit your outs, your backdoor flush, your gutter, and things of that nature, you're going to be good a huge percentage of the time, almost always, and you're going to win a nice sized pot, and not have to worry about having a second best hand. So those are huge, significant differences I want you to pay attention to. So kind of the moral of this story overall is look for boards that you can have some decent equity where your opponent is going to hit the boards very good. Use your position and stay very aggressive. If you do those things consistently, like this is just one small example, but you can plug this in and play with some equity calculators on your own. You'll see, you'll start seeing the difference, and you'll notice how often people are letting go of their hands, and it's setting you up for other plays as well, because you're seen as being aggressive. And I want to make a side note about that real quick. A lot of people say my game is hyper aggressive and so on and so on, and that is not at all true. It's not even anywhere close to the game. I have a pretty average overall aggression. I think my aggression is somewhere around 3.6, 3.7. What I do well is I make sure I'm picking my spots very well, and I know how to check call in the right spots, which flattens out my aggression. I'm not always just betting blindly, and I know how to raise in high equity spots or spots where my opponent's going to have low equity, and I'm going to be able to force them off a hand. So I do those well, and I pick my spots well, and my aggression doesn't have to be super high. It just has to be smart aggression. So it's an important point. I just want to point out, because I know I've heard several other comments on other forums. People talk about my videos or hands or suggestions and think I'm just being a total maniac or super aggressive, which is just not true. And yeah, it's just about having that smart selective aggression, and you do that consistently, and you make sure you're taking advantage of your spots consistently. Then that's where you're making consistent money. That's what I'm going to be trying to present in simple little concepts and ideas like this. I'm trying to go into several different videos that will just give you a framework of some kind of tactics. Like if you've played chess at all, you can use tactics. It's not something you use as a long-term strategy, but it's something you can use in short-term iterations, which happens a lot in poker because people are coming and going constantly in online poker. And you can use these tactics to kind of exploit your opponents or their lack of understanding, and just where they're at in general in their hands, and when they are in low equity spots, you take advantage of that. And so, wish you good luck with your game. I have several people that have even asked me recently, why do I do these videos, and why do I write Polished Poker and give it away for free and things like this. And it's of course because I enjoy teaching. It allows me to become a better player, lets me analyze my game. I'm hoping to expose you to some of the products Ace Poker Solutions has, because I'm a customer of my own products. I use them myself. I know they have a ton of value. Just kind of depends where you are in your game. But things like Leak Buster are awesome for any level of player. And Ace Poker Drills, if you want those foundational roots, that's a great place to start. And just some of the other tools that we offer. I'm hoping as you watch these and you get value from it, you're going to become a better player, and you'll become a customer and have a relationship with myself and our company. And I always, like I said, I always look forward to any feedback and questions, whether it's product related or video related or just general theory. I put my address or contact info that's down there on the bottom of the forums, and links to our sites. And again, I wish you much success. Take care.